The restaurant was 2 weeks away from its grand opening, and he was firing employees. "Your ideas are mediocre at best," Brandon Whitmore said, laughing, his voice resonating through the empty dining room. I had spent 8 months designing, and we're going in a different direction. Clean out your office by tonight. I stood there in shock as he dismissed everything I had put my heart into with a casual wave of his hand. "My name is Jasmine O'Connell, and I have been in the hospitality industry for 15 years, working my way up from server to restaurant consultant to executive chef. 6 months ago, I thought I had finally found my dream job when Brandon hired me to create the signature restaurant. I am the one who created every single detail, from the concept to the menu to the marketing strategy. He had promised me creative, freedom, a partnership opportunity, and my name on the door for his new boutique hotel, the Sterling Rose, in downtown Portland, Oregon. Instead, I was looking at the wreckage of my career. "But Brandon, the opening is in 2 weeks," I managed to say, my voice barely steady. "The staff is trained on my systems, the suppliers are lined up, and the marketing campaigns are already underway." The condescension in his voice made my stomach turn. I had spent months creating the farm-to-table concept that would highlight local Oregon ingredients and designing the entire interior. He shrugged, not even looking at me, as he browsed through his phone. "My new head chef will figure it out. Someone with actual credentials this time, not just small-town experience. He was keeping my recipes, my design, and my staff training, which he was calling mediocre while simultaneously planning to use it all." I asked about my contract, knowing that the answer would break my heart, and he said that we could terminate for creative differences with 30 days' notice in order to complement the seasonal menu, and train a staff of 20 people on my vision for elevated comfort food. I looked around the dining room one last time, admiring the warm wood accents, the custom light fixtures I had chosen that had taken weeks to source, and the open kitchen design that would allow me to enjoy my last paycheck. But that's all. His smirk told me he had planned this all along, probably waiting until I had done all the hard work before bringing in someone he deemed more prestigious. Showcase the culinary theater I had imagined. I felt a change in myself. It wasn't just about losing a job. It was about having my creative spirit stolen and repackaged under someone else's name. However, as I was packing my belongings to head to my office, I noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. A vacant storefront across the street had a for lease sign in the window, and all of a sudden, an idea started to. The following morning, I sat in the kitchen of my tiny apartment, surrounded by notebooks containing design sketches, business plans, and recipe tests that now seemed like relics from a vanished civilization. Everything I had made for the Sterling Rose was officially Brandon's property, but the enthusiasm and expertise that went into those creations were still mine. I had grown up in a family that operated restaurant tours. My grandmother had a my. Mother had taught me that success in this field wasn't just about food, but also about creating an experience that made people feel like they belonged somewhere special. She had owned a catering business that she built from nothing to a thriving business before selling it to retire, and my phone buzzed with a text from my best friend Kelly, who worked as a food critic for Portland Monthly. There was a small Irish pub in Boston. Kelly had been covering the Portland food scene for 8 years, so she understood the politics and personalities that could make or break a restaurant. More importantly, she knew my work and had been excited about the Sterling Rose project since I first told her about it over coffee at our restaurant. I had heard about Sterling Rose's brutal desire to get coffee and plot revenge, and her offer made me smile for the first time in a day. "I keep thinking about that empty space across the street from the hotel," I said absently, stirring my latte. "It's the perfect size, and the rent would be a fraction of what Brandon's paying for his space." Kelly raised an eyebrow. "Are you interested in this?" I have enough savings to cover the startup costs for a small business. It's nothing fancy, just good food and the kind of atmosphere that actually makes people want to stay longer than their Instagram photo session. You'd be going up against your former employer, maybe I said, feeling a familiar excitement building in my chest. I think I can handle a little competition, Kelly said, even though her tone suggested she saw this as more of an opportunity than a problem. As I said it, I realized I meant it. Brandon had undervalued me, assuming that without his hotel's marketing budget and prestigious location, I couldn't possibly. He may now own my designs and recipes, but he has never grasped what made them unique in the first place. He saw Instagram-worthy plating and trendy ingredients, but he missed the essence of what I had been attempting to create. A space where food brought people together, and each dish told a story about the community and the land that produced it. Coffee shop. 3 days later, I was standing in the vacant storefront across from the Sterling Rose, calculating square footage and imagining possibilities. The space had been a vintage clothing store, and the original hardwood floors and exposed brick walls gave it the kind of authentic character that Brandon's upscale hotel restaurant lacked. I wasn't just planning retaliation, I was planning a revolution. Could never duplicate the kitchen area, which was smaller than I was used to, but more than sufficient for the small dining experience I was starting to imagine. The landlord, an elderly woman named Patricia Chen, appeared unimpressed when I presented my idea for a pop-up restaurant, saying, "You want to compete with the fancy hotel across the street?" She inquired, looking through the window at the magnificent facade of the Sterling Rose. "I want to offer something they can't," I said, and then I explained my idea for what I was already calling Bloom, a neighborhood eatery that would completely alter its menu every 6 weeks to highlight various facets of Oregon's agricultural seasons. In contrast to the Patricia's expression changed as I discussed collaborating with local farms, bringing in guest chefs from food trucks and home kitchens, and establishing an environment where families could celebrate special occasions without feeling intimidated by pretentiousness. Brandon was implementing a static luxury concept with My Stolen Designs Bloom that would be dynamic, personal, and truly connected to the community. Service. How long would you need the space? She asked for just 3 months at first. I replied, "If it works, we can discuss a longer lease. My savings would cover the rent, basic supplies, and ingredients for a soft opening. But there would be no safety net, and if Bloom failed, my career in Portland would essentially be over." However, as I looked across I felt a resolve I hadn't felt since my grandmother taught me how to make her famous shepherd's pie when I was 12 years old. That afternoon, I called 3 people. My friend Margaret, who owned a small marketing firm that catered to local businesses. My former Sue, Chef Carlos, who had left Sterling Rose in solidarity after learning of my firing, and unexpectedly, the food blogger who had been following Portland's restaurant scene had already contacted me to inquire about my abrupt departure from the hotel project. Our conversations went better than I had anticipated. Carlos was keen to join me, and had already been receiving offers from other eateries looking to steal Sterling Rose's skilled employees. Margaret offered to manage my marketing in exchange for stock, and I had signed a 3-month lease and paid a deposit for the Sterling Rose, which was scheduled to open in 11 days. I was giving myself 10 days to create something that would make Brandon Whitmore regret ever coming across me, and the blogger, who was interested in the David versus Goliath story, wanted to document the entire process from concept to opening. The first week of building Bloom was, while Brandon across the street was juggling the last-minute details of his grand opening, I was converting my vacant space into something that resembled a hybrid of an art gallery and a farmhouse kitchen. I had enlisted 4 other Sterling Rose staff members who were dissatisfied with Brandon's management style, and we worked together to create and using hashtags like Farm to Glass and Seasonal Story. Margaret worked her magic on social media to create anticipation and position Bloom as Portland's most exciting culinary secret. This allowed for an efficient operation that could serve 40 covers with the kind of attention to detail that most Portland restaurants struggled to achieve even with twice the staff. That alluded to our philosophy without providing specifics. In the meantime, I contacted every farmer, forager, and artisan food producer with whom I had developed a relationship over the previous year. The majority of them were incensed about Brandon's treatment of me, and a number of them offered to supply ingredients at cost for our opening month, which was Thursday. I had originally intended to open Bloom the following week, but as I observed the hectic activity across the street through our front windows, I realized that I had been thinking too small. If I truly wanted to make a statement, I needed to open the same night as Brandon's grand opening. Friday was the start of a private party for investors and the media, followed by public service. When I called Kelly Tuesday night with my updated timeline, she asked, "You're talking about going from empty space to full service in 48 hours, but it's actually 60 hours. I checked my watch and realized that we weren't doing full service. Instead, we were doing something better. I had been working on the concept all week, and what had begun as a straightforward pop-up restaurant had changed. The following morning, I called every food critic, blogger, and influencer in Portland, and simply invited them to come watch us cook, rather than concealing our preparation in a closed area. Bloom would offer the one thing Brandon's operation couldn't: authenticity and innovation happening in real time, rather than attempting to compete with Sterling Rose's polished luxury. Carlos was dubious about the timeline but thrilled about the idea. On Wednesday night, I was opening our kitchen for what I called a preview dinner, where guests could watch us prepare their meals, ask questions about ingredients and techniques, and basically become part of the creative process. Brandon's formal dining room could never offer such an intimate educational experience. As we tested our final menu Tuesday night, he said, "It's either going to be brilliant or a complete disaster." I acknowledged plating a dish of roasted beets with herbed goat cheese and candied walnuts that featured 3 different local producers, but at least it will be memorable. By Wednesday afternoon, we had made reservations for 30 people for our preview dinner, and Margaret's social media campaign had created so much excitement that Portland Monthly decided to send a photographer. We were calmly preparing ingredients and setting up our open kitchen area so that guests could watch every stage of their meal, while Sterling Rose's staff frantically dealt with last-minute crisis management while they ran around in formal uniforms. The true test came when I saw Brandon outside our window, standing on the sidewalk with his phone pressed to his ear. He was obviously upset about something, and as he looked over at our area and noticed the activity, I saw his expression shift, from one of bewilderment to one of recognition to one of panic. 20 minutes later, his assistant entered Bloom carrying coffee to go. The message was clear. I wasn't hiding, and I wasn't intimidated. Thursday evening arrived with the kind of crisp October weather that made Portland feel like Portland. Pretended to browse while clearly scoping out our setup. I smiled and offered her a sample of our signature appetizer. "Please tell Mr. Whitmore we wish him luck with his opening," I said sweetly. I had to admit that the scene looked amazing as I watched guests arrive at Brandon's private opening party at the Sterling Rose through our windows. Valets were parking luxury cars, photographers were documenting arrivals, and the soft lighting from inside the hotel made everything appear like a movie set. For a brief moment, I felt a sense of loss for what I had contributed to, and would never be given credit for. I've never seen anything like this in Portland, and our open kitchen concept was working exactly as I had hoped in place of the traditional method. "This is amazing," said Janet Morrison, a food writer for The Oregonian, as she watched Carlos expertly dissect a whole duck while describing the sourcing story behind each component of the dish. Bloom's restaurant experience, where patrons placed menu orders and waited for service, was more akin to attending an elegant dinner party with a professional chef as the host. We live-streamed parts of the evening on our social media accounts, and the response was swift and overwhelming. People were leaving comments in real time, inquiring about methods and ingredients, asking for reservations for our official opening the following week. By 8 p.m., we had made solid reservations for our first month of business, but the true confirmation came when I saw 3 of Brandon's investors, whom I had met during my time there, beginning to show up among the crowd, gathered outside our windows. One of them, a well-known local businesswoman named Victoria Brennan, actually left Brandon's event and entered our space saying, "Jasmine, I had no idea you were doing this," as she sampled our butternut squash soup with sage oil and pumpkin seed, brittle. They were obviously more interested in what was going on at Bloom than in going to his private party across the street. Remarkable. It's all I had imagined Sterling Rose to be, but with real soul. Several other guests, including the Portland Monthly photographer, overheard her comment, and I recognized that the story was telling itself, since social media posts from our preview dinner were already receiving more interaction than the formal opening coverage of Sterling Rose, and food bloggers were. The highlight of the evening was when Brandon himself showed up at our front door. I watched from the kitchen as he stood on the sidewalk, obviously deciding whether or not to enter his formal opening party, which was still going on across the street. But the excitement and energy at Bloom were unmistakable after what felt like in Jasmine, he began in a voice that was a mix of desperation and rage. "We need to talk," as he pushed open our door and proceeded directly to where I was plating desserts. The whole restaurant fell silent as Carlos paused in his preparation. Our patrons ceased talking, and I could sense that everyone was observing to see how this altercation would play out. I looked up. For the first time since he fired me, I was tweeting Brandon's eyes from the vanilla bean panna cotta I was garnishing with fresh berries and honey. "I'm a little busy right now," I said calmly, turning back to the dessert. "But if you'd like to make a reservation, we might have something. Available in about 6 weeks. The silence lasted for another moment, before Brandon turned and left, without saying anything. The damage was already done. Everyone in Bloom had seen the exchange, and by morning, the story would be widely circulated throughout Portland's culinary scene. The following morning, however, brought a flurry of media attention that surpassed even Margaret's most hopeful predictions. The Portland Tribune ran a front-page story about the incident, with images from both opening events and culinary David and Goliath taking place on opposite sides of the same street. The social media response that really astounded me was the fact that videos from our preview dinner had been shared thousands of times, and foodies from Seattle to San Francisco were inquiring as to when they could travel to Portland to experience Bloom. More importantly, the expert Carlos received calls from 3 different restaurants attempting to hire him, which he politely declined. 2 investors contacted Margaret regarding expansion opportunities, and most unexpectedly, I got a call from the executive chef of one of Portland's most renowned restaurants, asking if I would be interested in working with them on a special project. The response was everything I had hoped for. Event, but the true confirmation came when Victoria Brennan called me. "Jasmine, I owe you an apology," she said. I invested in Sterling Rose because I thought the idea you gave Brandon and me 6 months ago was great. After last night, it's obvious that you were the creative force behind everything that made that project unique." "Thank you," I said honestly. I'm moved by her candor. But the real reason I'm calling is to talk about investing in your idea. Because what you've developed could revolutionize Portland dining. As I hung up, I saw that my 3-month pop-up was quickly growing into something much larger, with reservations going into January media. The afternoon brought an unexpected guest. Brandon's head chef, Thomas Hartwell, the prestigious hire who had replaced me and a James Beard Award winner with an impressive resume, provided coverage that money couldn't buy, and most importantly, a group of people who shared my vision for what a restaurant could be when it prioritized community and authenticity over prestige and profit margins. As I showed him around Bloom, explaining our concept and introducing him to our team, I noticed his expression shift from skepticism to genuine interest to something that looked like regret. He looked uneasy as he stood in our doorway and said, "I wanted to see what all the fuss was about," in a tone that was carefully neutral. This is what I thought I was signing up for. Because he acknowledged that after we concluded the tour, Brandon showed me your original idea and claimed it was his idea. However, by the time I got there, all the originality and sense of community had been eliminated, and it was just another pricey restaurant. His admission validated my suspicions that Brandon had used my work to draw in investors and employees before removing everything that made the idea. Thomas's visit also gave me an idea that would become the last part of my revenge plan. Would you be interested in working with a guest chef? I ask that you prepare your food however you truly want to, and we could show Portland what Sterling Rose could have been. The collaboration dinner that was planned for the following month sold out within. As I locked up that night and looked across the street at Sterling Rose, I felt a sense of satisfaction that went beyond simple retaliation. I had demonstrated that authenticity and vision were more important than money, and more importantly, it sent a clear message to Brandon and everyone else in Portland's food scene that the best people wanted to work with Bloom rather than against it. 6 weeks following our opening, Brandon Whitmore stood in my restaurant for the second time. But this time he wasn't the self-assured, dismissive man who had fired me. His shoulders were slumped, his expensive suit looked rumpled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that would outlast whatever small satisfaction he felt he had gained by firing me. "Jasmine, please," he said, his voice stripped of its former arrogance. "I made a mistake, a huge mistake, and I want to make this right." He talked about the Sterling Rose's trouble filling even half of its tables on weeknights, despite its lavish opening and prestigious pedigree. Bloom, on the other hand, had a 2-month waiting list and had been featured in 3 national food magazines. I continued plating the evening special, pan-seared halibut with parsnip puree and crispy Brussels sprout leaves, while he spoke. Carlos and our other team members pretended to focus on their own tasks, but I could tell they were listening to every word. This was the moment we had all been waiting for, though none of us had expected Brandon to look quite so defeated. "What exactly are you making a proposal?" "A partnership. You could run both restaurants, maintain the Bloom concept here, and redesign Sterling Rose the way you originally envisioned it," I asked, not looking up from my work. "Your name would be on both doors, full creative control, 50% ownership of the restaurant operations." The offer was all I had, and it was generous beyond measure. Desired 8 months ago when I initially agreed to build his restaurant, but as I surveyed Bloom, soaking in the friendly giggles of our patrons, the effortless camaraderie of our employees, and the sincere excitement that pervaded the place each night, I came to the realization that what I had created was more valuable. than any collaboration Brandon could provide. "I appreciate the offer," I said, finally looking him in the eyes. "But I'm not interested." "What do you want?" "Name your price and I'll sell you the restaurant operation outright if that's what it takes." His face crumpled with an expression that combined surprise, desperation, and defeat. I smiled, feeling a sweet and complete sense of satisfaction. "There's nothing you have that I want, Brandon. You taught me that the true value was never in the building or the 3 months later. The Portland Business Journal announced that the Sterling Rose Hotel was closing its restaurant permanently because it could no longer compete with the cutting-edge dining concepts that had revolutionized the neighborhood. Brandon had discreetly sold the hotel to a national chain that shared this vision and belief. I read the news while sitting in Patricia's vacant storefront, which was now the permanent location of Bloom Restaurant. We had signed a 5-year lease, expanded into the adjacent space, and constructed a kitchen to accommodate the cooking classes and special events that had grown to be as popular as our regular dinner. The plan was to turn the restaurant space into additional guest suites and a grab-and-go market. Leaders in the food industry nationwide had taken notice of the service's success, and I had declined 3 offers to franchise the idea in other cities in order to concentrate on refining what we had established in Portland. The irony wasn't lost on me that Brandon's attempt to steal my idea had ultimately compelled me to produce something much better than what I had initially intended. But Bloom wasn't just. We were listed in Food and Wine magazine as one of the 10 restaurants transforming American dining, and the article highlighted our dedication to supporting local farmers and offering affordable fine dining experiences. However, it had also become a model for how food businesses could put community engagement, sustainability, and genuine hospitality ahead of profit margins and prestige. The fact that our team grew from 5 to 15 members, all of whom shared ownership stakes in the company, was the true measure of our success. Carlos became my partner. Co-executive chef Margaret expanded her marketing agency in response to Bloom's success, and even Thomas Hartwell quit his job at another restaurant to work full-time at Brandon's. As I stood in my kitchen getting ready for another sold-out night, I thought about how much my life had changed since Brandon fired me. The journey from humiliation to triumph had taught me that the best retaliation isn't just success, but also creating something so genuine and exceptional. Everyone in Portland's culinary scene knew exactly who deserved the credit. Sometimes the best present someone can give you is the encouragement that makes your previous opponent's vision seem insignificant in contrast. Makes you realize who you really are. Able to independently create the retaliation had been enjoyable. However, in the future I was constructing would be even more delightful.